Imagine the sun just stops working. No warning, no forecast, no explanation. Ancient Chinese court astronomers were reportedly executed for failing to predict one. An entire civilization once crowned a fake, temporary king just to trick the sky into sparing the real one. A battle between two armies stopped mid-fight because both sides dropped their weapons and stared upward. And in more than one ancient culture, the people who ruled you may have quietly wanted you to stay terrified of what was happening above your head. Let's start with the moment the rule broke.
Picture it from ground level. No context, no science. Midday. The light starts fading, but not like a cloud passing over. Wrong, gradual, wrong. The temperature drops noticeably within minutes. Birds go quiet and return to their roosts, confused about whether the day is ending. Then the sun is simply gone, replaced by a black disk ringed with pale fire, and the sky fills with stars that have no business being visible at noon. Here's the evolutionary why underneath this entire video. Human cognition runs almost entirely on pattern prediction. Sunrise, sunset. This is the single most reliable pattern a human brain has ever tracked, reinforced every single day of every single life, going back further than language itself. A predator threat is frightening, but it's a known category of danger. A total, sourceless violation of the sun-day pattern is something else entirely. It's the operating system itself appearing to fail. So the real question isn't just what ancient people felt in that moment, it's what they actually did next.
Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Across civilizations with no contact with one another, the same explanation kept independently appearing. Something was eating the sun. In China, the culprit was Tian-gu, a celestial dog devouring the solar disk. In Norse mythology, it was the wolf Sköll, chasing the sun across the sky and finally catching it. In Hindu tradition, the severed head of the demon Rahu was said to swallow the sun in an endless cycle of revenge against the gods. This is the multi-causal question worth sitting with. Why does the exact same explanatory structure, something devouring the sun, emerge independently on different continents in cultures with zero contact? The leading explanation isn't mystical. A sudden, biting disappearance genuinely does resemble something being consumed, and a predator is eating the light is a far more intuitive story for a pattern-seeking brain than the moon has briefly aligned between the earth and the sun. The myth wasn't random. It was the most obvious available explanation, arrived at independently over and over. So if the sun was being eaten, what do you actually do about that? This is the gritty detail behind the myth. If something is eating the sun, the logical response is to scare it away. In ancient China, this meant banging pots, beating drums, and firing arrows directly into the sky. A documented, recurring ritual response meant to frighten Tian-gu into releasing its meal. Norse communities engaged in similarly loud, chaotic noise-making, aimed at driving off Sköll before the wolf could finish the job. In Mesoamerica, Spanish chronicler Bernardino de Sahagún documented Aztec eclipse responses that went further than noise. Communal wailing, loud lamentation, and ritual bloodletting tied to the belief that the sun itself had been wounded and needed to be strengthened through sacrifice. This wasn't panic without structure. It was panic with a specific, internally logical ritual attached to it. Not every culture reacted with alarm, though. Some ethnographic records of certain Native American communities describe quieter, more reverent ritual observance during eclipses rather than chaotic fear. A reminder that ancient humans were never one single reaction, but dozens of different cultures independently deciding what an incomprehensible sky event actually meant. But somewhere in the middle of all this noise and ritual, a very different kind of response was quietly forming. According to the ancient Chinese text, the Shu Jing, two royal astronomers named Shi and Ho were executed by order of Emperor Zhongkong for failing to predict an eclipse in advance, leaving the court and capital caught completely off guard by the sky's sudden attack. This account sits firmly in Tier 3 territory. It's a semi-legendary record, not verified historical fact, and modern historians treat it with real skepticism about whether it happened exactly as described, or at all. But whether literally true or not, the story reveals something real about the stakes involved. Predicting an eclipse wasn't treated as idle curiosity. In a world where the ruling class's authority rested partly on appearing to understand, or control, the cosmos, failing to see this coming wasn't just an embarrassment. It was framed, at least in legend, as a capital offense. Which raises an obvious question. Was anyone actually capable of predicting these events? Yes, and centuries earlier than most people assume. Babylonian astronomers, recording celestial observations on cuneiform tablets known collectively as the Enuma Anu Enlil, tracked eclipses across generations and identified a repeating pattern now called the Saros cycle, a roughly 18-year, 11-day interval after which eclipses tend to recur in a similar pattern. This is established science, stated plainly. The Babylonians achieved genuine predictive accuracy without any theoretical understanding of orbital mechanics, gravity, or the true geometry of the Earth, Moon, and Sun. They didn't know why eclipses happened. They simply tracked when, with obsessive, multi-generational precision, and let pure pattern recognition do the rest. Fear on one side of the world, calculation on the other. Same event, completely different human response. And that gap is about to become the most important part of this story. For a long time, the general assumption was that ancient rulers were just as terrified and confused by eclipses as everyone else. Powerless kings staring up at the same incomprehensible sky as their subjects. Recent historical evidence has significantly complicated that picture. In ancient Mesopotamia, when astronomer priests predicted an eclipse interpreted as a bad omen, specifically threatening the king, a documented ritual called the Sharpuhi, the substitute king ritual, was carried out. A temporary stand-in, sometimes a commoner or even a criminal, was placed on the throne to symbolically absorb the danger. The real king stepped back from public life during the eclipse period, and once the danger had passed, the substitute was removed, and the real ruler resumed the throne. This is well-documented Assyrian and Babylonian practice, not legend, and it reveals something the earlier chapters didn't. Eclipses weren't just endured by the elite in fear. They were actively managed, planned for, and used as political theater. Proof that the astronomer-priest class could see the danger coming, and the ruling class knew exactly how to stage a response to it. That combination, prediction plus performance, turns out to be the real engine behind this entire topic. Here's the multi-causal reveal, and it's the core of this whole video. Eclipse terror wasn't the product of one single cause. It was at least three independent pressures compounding on top of each other. First, the genuine cognitive shock of a broken pattern, covered back in Chapter 1. Real, universal, and not fabricated by anyone. Second, a growing predictive gap. A small specialist class of astronomer priests increasingly could see these events coming, while the general population could not. Third, and this is the uncomfortable part, that gap was actively exploited. Rulers and priesthoods who could frame themselves as the only ones capable of reading, or managing, the sky's danger, reinforced their own authority every single time an eclipse occurred, and their prediction proved correct. Fear of the eclipse was real, but by the time you reached the substitute king ritual, that fear had also become infrastructure, a recurring, predictable opportunity to demonstrate who was allowed to speak for the cosmos, and who simply had to trust them. Here's the obvious pushback. If Babylonian astronomers could genuinely predict eclipses centuries in advance, doesn't that mean the whole primitive terror narrative is overstated? Maybe even wrong? Partially true, and worth separating carefully. Established, predictive eclipse astronomy genuinely existed and genuinely worked within small, specialized classes of astronomer priests in societies like Babylon and later Greece. That's not in dispute. What's genuinely speculative is how far that specialist knowledge actually spread beyond the temple or court. The evidence for eclipse prediction reaching the average farmer, soldier, or merchant is far thinner than the evidence for the astronomers themselves. And reconstructing exactly what an ordinary person believed 3,000 years after the fact has real limits we probably can't fully overcome. The honest answer is that ancient humans were never one uniform group with one uniform level of understanding. There were, quite literally, those who calculated the sky and those who were simply told what it meant. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Full scientific understanding hasn't eliminated the instinctive unease. Modern researchers studying public reactions to total solar eclipses have documented real, measurable anxiety responses even among viewers who fully understand the astronomical mechanics. A lingering physiological unease that education alone doesn't fully erase. People today don't reach for drums or arrows, but the pulled-back stillness, the goosebumps, the instinct to gather with others the moment the sky goes dark at noon. That response is still firing, on schedule, thousands of years after the astronomers figured out exactly why it happens. We didn't outgrow the reaction. We just stopped needing an explanation to feel it. Here's the thing you can't unsee now. The impulse to explain the incomprehensible and the impulse to control other people through that explanation didn't end with ancient astronomy. It just changed shape. Somewhere between the terrified crowd banging pots at the sky and the astronomer priest quietly calculating the next eclipse down to the day, a very old pattern was set. Some people fear the unknown, and other people learn to profit from managing that fear. You don't reach for a bow when the sky goes dark anymore. You know exactly what's happening, down to the physics. But the next time something incomprehensible shows up in your world, watch closely for who shows up claiming they alone understand it. Because somewhere, someone is still betting you'll reach for something.